It's a great pleasure for me to introduce Lockie. Lockie is 88 years young, whereas I'm 67 years old. He's one of these people who is full of energy, full of get up and go, and always coming up with new ideas and things to tackle. Lockie is an economist, an entrepreneur, and a true follower of Christ. In many ways, his eyes were opened in 1961, when he was one of the first people in Ireland to get a Fulbright scholarship to travel to UCLA. And he very much picked up the can-do attitude that was very prevalent there in California. And he's brought it back to Ireland, and he's had it ever since. He has founded several companies. I can think of Dots and Winnie and others. And he was general manager of others, the Economist Intelligence Unit and a number of others. An amazing starter and an amazing manager. In 1968, that's over 50 years ago, the Biafra War led to a huge famine. There was a military blockade around Nigeria. Lockie and his wife Kay called a meeting in their house. They thought maybe 5 or 10 would turn up. 35 or 40 turned up, including some Spiritan friends. And they agreed to meet every Tuesday. They raised a large amount and managed to send shiploads of aid to Nigeria and to Biafra. That aid operation, which they started back in 1968, is today called Concern International and has an annual budget of $200 million and 3,600 staff working in 24 of the poorest countries of the world. Lockie also founded the Irish Refugee Council. There's no stopping him. He just keeps going. But Lockie has worked for 10 years on his book, The Curia is the Pope. It was very much a labor of love for Lockie over many years. He's always been devoted to Christ, and he used to keep records and minutes of suitable articles and things that were coming up, and he knew he would put it into a book someday, and thankfully that day has come. So for me, it's a great honor to introduce the economist, entrepreneur, and true follower of Christ, John O'Loughlin Kennedy, also known as Lockie. Over to you, Lockie.
Since the book wouldn't show for Colm, I'll hold it up and let you see it here. It's yellow and white for the papal colours, and it's a jigsaw puzzle, and the Curia is in the place where the Pope should be. And the message is that the Catholic Church must change its priorities if it is to fulfill its mission in the modern world. In this short talk, I will of necessity make some sweeping statements. The research and supporting facts are in the book. The title of the book, The Curia is the Pope, comes directly from Pope John Paul II. When Cardinal Arndts suggested that he was giving the Curia too much free rein, John Paul replied, "You are mistaken. The Curia is the Pope." At that point, he had been 17 years in the job, so he knew. The papacy combines a Pope and the Curia. The Pope is a massively overworked mortal, while the Curia is a permanent institution of about 3,000 people. This makes for a very unbalanced partnership. Sorry, I have to adjust my computer for a moment. It doesn't want to. Okay, I think I have it. Historically, popes have lasted an average of 9 years. More recently, they've been average 13 years in office. They're normally elderly, well past their prime when they take on the job. For the past 20 popes, the average age on election was, exactly as Cullum suggested, 67. Not an age to take on a new job, but not an age to take on any new job. But his job is really 7 jobs rolled into one. He's head of state. He's supreme legislator. He's chief executive. He's chief justice. He's chief teacher. He's head of foreign relations and head of human relations, human resources, carrying the can for the appointment of every bishop and every subsequent promotion in the highly centralized organization that serves 1.33 billion people. Like a government minister, coping with his job involves maintaining a working relationship with his team. It controls access to him and filters his mail. It rules the bishops. Everybody knows that it will outlast the Pope. Consequently, the Curia is the effective government of the Church. It is a permanent, self-perpetuating bureaucracy. By controlling its own recruitment and promoting only those who display consistent loyalty, it maintains a constant ethos. Since the Council of Trent, its officers have all undergone the same extended seminary formation. This ensures exceptional resistance to change. So we ask the question, if the Church is a worshipping community, should it have the ability to change? Is the ability to change desirable in the case of the Catholic Church? But let's look first at what we mean by worship. Worship is about prioritizing. It's about giving top priority to the gods or to God. Worshipping as a community is about the group assigning top priority to God's wishes, to his commands and preferences. And even though the good intentions are not always put into practice, over time they make a difference to the attitudes and lives of the participants. Prior to Christianity, there were many gods. I'm sorry, I'm losing things on the computer. Now, prior to Christianity, there were many gods. Okay? There had to be. There were too many unpredictable things, like the harvest, the weather, the river, the forests, the ocean, fertility, military affairs, and so on. Community worship of those gods was largely driven by fear that they would offend, that if they were offended, they would get vindictive and use their powers to visit some disaster on the community. This kind of thinking was clearly reflected in Roman law. But then everything changed with Jesus Christ. Imagine the surprise of his revelations. There is only one God who created everything and is in charge of everything. He loves us as his own children, and he wants us to return his love. Moreover, he wants us to love one another. Furthermore, he is always ready to forgive us when we fail. Jesus defined those who would be his followers exclusively in terms of love. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples. In an extraordinary gesture that no pagan philosopher, priest, or poet had dared to anticipate, he actually gave his followers authority to forgive sins on his behalf. This is the good news of Jesus Christ, who claimed to be the Son of God. And God confirmed it all by bringing him back to life after a very public and undeniable death, a death which Jesus himself had foretold. The resurrection validated the message. God wants us to return his love and to worship him because we love him, not under threat, not under force, but out of love. When we meet as a worshipping community, we tell him and remind one another that despite our frequent failings, we want to fulfill his wishes. We want our priorities to mirror his priorities. His priorities can be summed up in one principle and two mandates. The principle, the greatest commandment, love God above all and your neighbour as yourself, on which he says all the law and the prophets depend. That means if it doesn't relate to love or the lack of it, it has no place in Christly morality. And the two mandates are, do this in commemoration of me and make disciples of all the nations. He had already defined his disciples exclusively in terms of love. As the people of God, we have been called to spread this good news. We do it by example when we take care of his children, of all his children, not excluding ourselves. St. Francis taught us that we should extend our love to all God's creatures. Under Pope Francis, Roman Catholicism has recently accepted that this includes caring for the environment on which all life depends. This is not a new doctrine, but it is the application of the law of love to a new situation. Until the 20th century, human activity did not pose a threat to the planet, or if it did, people were not aware of it. Now we know. The worship part does not change with time or circumstances. The expression does. The organization needs to take account of this. Early Christian communities that followed the way were seen to be different from their neighbors in their active concern for the needy and in their relationship directly to their God without the need for a priestly mediator. This did not mean that they did not need leaders. St. Paul lists 9 gifts of the Holy Spirit, charisms necessary for building up the community, and 5 different callings, so that the saints together make a unity in the work of service. Notably, there is no mention there of priests. In his view, a priestly people did not need them. The increase in the number of Christians brought the need for organization and order. Managing leaders emerged, mainly from the local organizers, who were known in Greek as episkopai, from which we get the words episcopal and bishop. In time, being a bishop came to be a full-time job, and each bishop oversaw a number of Christian communities. When Christianity was made the religion of the empire, the structure became standardized. The long-established religious bureaucracy in Rome had the job of managing the abrupt change to Christian worship. In this way, the bishops became part of the public administration. Thus, the civil structure became the blueprint for church organization, a hierarchy of local officers answerable to the bureaucracy in Rome, with its head the Bishop of Rome answerable only to the emperor, until the 8th century. The pagan bureaucracy had been in existence for 600 years as the Roman religious bureaucracy when Catholicism was made state religion by edict of the emperor. The Bishop of Rome became its leader and high priest, with the theologically indefensible title of Pontifex Maximus. Whatever reservations the Bishop of Rome may have had about the edict would have been overridden completely by the assurance that it brought of a permanent end to state persecution of Catholicism. The Bishop of Rome thus became a fully fledged civil servant, answering only to the emperor. You can imagine the challenges that he faced. A Department of State that had total control of religious affairs throughout the empire had to be kept running smoothly, while the pagan priests were trained in a new liturgy, and the pagan ethos of the bureaucracy had to become a Christian ethos. Change happened on both sides. Christianity adopted the Roman administrative structure and gained power through the pervading influence of Roman law. The papacy enjoyed total control until the conquest by the barbarians brought state Christianity to an end in the Western Empire. Rome continued to be legally in charge of religion in the Eastern Empire for the next 500 years. But its distance from the court intrigue in Constantinople and the more spiritual and less legalistic Hellenist mindset led to growing tension with the Eastern bishops and the gradual erosion of Roman influence. Rome has developed the theory that all this was preordained and choreographed in detail by God, and that it implements some eternal divine plan. This teaching does not allow anything for the vagaries of human choice and decision-making, which God never overrides. Only in freedom can we love. Undoubtedly, God permitted the Roman development to happen, but that does not indicate an exclusive preference for it for all time. Furthermore, the teaching is suspiciously self-serving. Those who elucidate it enjoy the power, prestige, and security that it confers. God allowed an alternative structure to develop on a remote Western island that had never been conquered by the Romans and had never experienced imperial administration. In Ireland, the church was structured around independent monasteries with their elected abbots, who were generally more influential than the bishops. Sometimes the bishop lived in the monastery, subject to the monastic rule and to the abbot. This alternative structure gave rise to what became known as the Island of Saints and Scholars, and it generated a powerful flow of missionaries into Scotland and Europe for about 600 years. Tens of thousands of Irish monks made a lifelong commitment to bringing the love of Christ to people who had never heard the good news. Their sacrifice was known as white martyrdom. This is not to suggest that the Irish questioned the primacy, centrality, and authority of Rome. While recognizing all these, it just had a somewhat different structure and priorities, which produced this extraordinary missionary spirit from the 6th to the 12th century. This Irish variation was validated by its unmatched achievement and longevity. The monks made a massive contribution to the re-Christianization of Europe after the barbarians overran the Western Empire. To this day, there are traces of more than 800 Irish monastic settlements stretching as far as Eastern Europe. St. Columbanus is remembered in many place names across Southern Europe. St. Kilian is still celebrated in Würzburg as the apostle of the Franks. He is credited with converting this warlike nation, which went on to rescue Rome from the Lombards. Their king, Pepin the Short, donated the recovered territories to the Pope, making him the sovereign ruler and monarch of the Papal States, an arrangement that lasted for 1,000 years. Even when the territories were lost and democratic ideas were beginning to take hold worldwide, the papacy continued to be structured as an absolute monarchy matched with a bureaucracy. Unfortunately, every bureaucracy is essentially selfish. It is driven by the group need to survive, and this leads it to seek more and more power over its environment. It would fall apart if each officer were to follow his own preference or conscience. Compliance with the groupthink becomes a virtue. The seminary formation shared by every person of consequence in Rome inculcates an unquestioning respect for the current structure and for the ecclesial ranks leading up to the papacy. The groupthink of the Curia is that God's eternal plan does not change and must be enforced. This explains Congar's puzzle as to how good and prayerful men could persecute people towards whom they should be showing love and care. I've taken this little excursion into the contrasting Irish history because I think it's directly relevant to what Root and Branch is all about. Root and Branch is looking for change, not in the creed or in the basics or in the mission, but in structures and priorities. Root and Branch is challenging the notion that the current church arrangements are all part of an eternal and unchangeable divine plan, which must be adhered to minutely, even when circumstances have changed. The Irish missionary achievement disproved that theory a very long time ago. The same era saw the growing strength and influence of Rome in the West and its decline in the East. The secular element in church management took on greater importance when the church became a sovereign state with the Pope as its monarch. Later, the two most powerful Renaissance families in Italy, the Colonnas and the de' Medici bankers, struggled for control of the papacy and the territory. Political ambition tended to further secularize Roman priorities, even to the point of influencing church doctrine. For example, the mention of two swords in St. Luke's Gospel was given a far-fetched interpretation to bolster an ambitious claim that papal authority spread over all temporal rulers. That doctrine is forgotten now. In the East, the authority of Rome was in decline due to the distance from the levers of power and differences in mindset. Moreover, Constantinople, as the new Rome, began to vie with the original Rome. The Patriarch of Constantinople began to style himself as ecumenical patriarch, and this was seen as encroaching on Roman turf. The papacy reacted, as would any secular bureaucracy, by attempting to reassert its sovereignty. The bureaucracy had been in total control for 100 years and was ambitious to restore its power. The tension reached breaking point in the 11th century when Rome tried unilaterally and unnecessarily to enforce the addition of one contentious word, filioque, to the creed that had served the Catholic world for 700 years. Tempers flared on both sides, leading to mutual excommunications and ultimately to the East-West schism and the separation of the Orthodox churches from Rome. That was in 1054. 1,000 years later, these excommunications have been repudiated, but the worshipping communities are still divided over the issue of papal authority. Nobody suggests that the Orthodox churches have lost the faith, and this goes to prove that subjection to the Roman pontiff is not an essential mark of the Church of Christ. The East-West schism was caused by Roman ambitions to sovereignty. Since then, the same power ambition has prompted and led to 4 further schisms, which have alienated almost half the Christian world from the Catholic Church. The Great Schism, where the Church had 3 popes at one time, was a straight scrap about which faction would dominate. Roman pride and ambition played a decisive part in the Protestant Reformation. Unfortunately, Leo X's angry reaction turned a theological dispute and some justified criticism of the Renaissance papacy into the Reformation. This resulted in the loss of half of Europe and all of Great Britain, and endless religious wars. Vatican I caused the old Catholic schism by making the Pope infallible and giving him universal jurisdiction Vatican I caused the old Catholic schism by making the Pope infallible and giving him universal jurisdiction with unlimited power. The legislation of the dogmas was driven by the ambitions of both Pope and Curia. My book offers 12 formulas for unwinding these irreformable dogmas. Only one of them will be needed when the Church is ready for it. Infallibility had conditions attached, which have limited its use to one occasion in 150 years. The mere title, however, opened the way for a substitute, which we will call pseudo-infallibility, because that is exactly what it is. The Church now has a body of pseudo-infallible teaching, going way beyond anything revealed by Jesus Christ. Its defense has involved deception, extravagant secrecy, shoddy scholarship, amnesia, coercion, and downright lies. So many doctrines and regulations are now deemed irreformable that the management has snookered itself and is now unable to make the changes necessary to fulfill its mission. Most of the unsolved problems can be traced back to the 2 dogmas. Priorities are hopelessly disordered. Human regulations, traditional practices, and excerpts from papal documents routinely take precedence over the Great Commandment and the 2 mandates of Jesus Christ. The most recent synod is an example. The search to find better ways to make disciples of the indigenous people of Amazonia and to enable them to commemorate Jesus weekly in the Eucharist foundered on a plethora of secondary rules and regulations and a few allegedly unchangeable traditions and privileges. Yet another major schism is happening in our time. A new kind, silent, gradual, and disorganized, and caused by papal loss of credibility. The attempted deception in regard to the morality of contraception leaked out. Then clergy sex abuse and the revelation by the secular media that Rome had been covering it up using mandatory secrecy for almost 100 years. There was hypocrisy over Vatican II, with Popes John Paul II and Benedict XVI paying lip service to the Council, while the Curia manifestly ignored, obstructed, or reversed many of its decisions. Repeated attempts to turn the refusal of ordination to women into a doctrine have been rejected by the faithful. They can see it as transparent prejudice. Religious hypocrisy is powerfully counter-evangelizing. Disenchanted Catholics no longer feel the need to start another church. They just walk away from their worshipping community. Few are questioning the basics, such as the Trinity, the Incarnation, death, and resurrection. Thus, some remain Catholics in essence, while deciding for themselves on the secondary issues and the trivia. They link belief to what they discern as being probably true. Educated people refuse to be frightened into conformity. They no longer believe that the keys were given exclusively to Peter and his successors, or, for that matter, that there was only one set of keys. Unfortunately, the exaggeration of magisterial infallibility after Vatican I prevents the authorities from joining in open, intelligent discussion with the faithful, and thus inhibits the development of the sensus fidelium. Issues demanding attention are debated by a synod of selected bishops who are bound by oaths of fidelity to the current papal magisterium. They are not allowed to think outside the box, or if they do, they're not allowed to share their thoughts. The Church has grown and developed for 2 millennia, confident in Christ's promise to be with us. Yet now we see the Church failing, quantitatively and qualitatively. Each generation of committed Catholic parents finds itself progressively less able to pass on the commitment to the faith to their children, as each generation becomes more educated. Ironically, while the Church that led the way in bringing education to the masses and invented the universities, it has not been good at evangelizing the educated. It is losing ground in areas where people stay in education until they are 22 or 25, while gaining ground where people stay in school until their mid-teens. The younger generation is now dismissing church authority as unreasonable and out of date and out of touch with reality. They're not against it. To them, it is just irrelevant. Without being conscious of it, they are accustomed to a world that has already been hugely influenced by Christianity and the Great Commandment. Christ's challenge to convert the world to one where all God's children are loved and given the opportunity to realize their potential is gradually being realized itself. One aspect of the change that progressed painfully slowly for almost 2 millennia is the denial of opportunity to women. Since the turn of the 20th century, however, women's place in the world has improved radically and rapidly. Regrettably, this is an area where the church authorities are now trailing the world and trailing the sensus fidelium. The people of God, Protestant and Catholic, continue to teach the world to behave more lovingly towards their neighbours. People's love for one another is more evident now than ever before through the lives of the people of God. Acceptable standards of behaviour towards one another have improved over the centuries. We no longer burn heretics or suspected witches. The world has abolished slavery as an economic or social system. Its modern occurrence is considered an unacceptable aberration. The use of torture to interrogate suspects is no longer tolerated. Criminals are no longer punished by mutilation or deportation. Civilized countries no longer tolerate flogging. More than 80 countries have abolished the death penalty for all victims since 1976. In democratic countries where governments are influenced by the will of the population, people tolerate taxes and share their wealth with the needy, supporting some level of public health care, education, and social security. They approve growing budgets for overseas development. This is an area where the institutional church has been a leader rather than a follower, largely through the unselfish dedication of missionaries. No less than 192 nations have signed the United Nations Agenda 2030, committing themselves to 17 Sustainable Development Goals. This is a dramatic commitment to loving one's neighbour on an international scale never known before, and it's working. So, for all the weaknesses we have identified in the institution, we can take heart that the followers of Jesus together are gradually making disciples of the nations. Whatever success we have made to date, I've lost the page again. Whatever success we've made to date can be credited to Christianity and a whole united can be credited to Christianity as a whole, united in the one church, the body of Christ on earth. But we could, of course, have done better. A market penetration of 2.33 billion Christians out of a total population of 7.7 billion. That is 30% of the market after 2,000 years has to be disappointing. We still have weaknesses to face. Pope Francis wants us to do this using synodality. Root and Branch is answering his call in a prophetic way and is being truly synodal in inviting both laity and bishops to participate. Whether any bishops accept your invitation to participate or not, you will be doing the work of the Lord as you search the ways to improve the institution and provide an avenue of expression for the sensus fidelium. I hope the research and proposals in my book will help in setting the agenda. The book contains 29 proposals for the way forward, obviously too much for one synod to address. Among them, however, there are several strategic ones which could lead on to the others and could perhaps open a door for the action of the Holy Spirit. The organisers might consider selecting from these. When studied, they do not appear quite as radical as they do when you make a list of them. 1. give top priority to the Great Commandment and Christ's two mandates. Put them back where they belong. 2. Extricate the Church from the Vatican dogmas, which have done more harm than good. 3. Institute continuing governance based on the College of Bishops, always with the Pope, as envisaged by Vatican II. And Proposal 22 is reconstitute and decentralize the Curia, making it subject to the governance of the College of Bishops. Proposal 4 is adopt an overwhelming option for the truth. This would have far-reaching consequences. And Proposal 23 is give the bishops back the right and the authority to fulfill their diocesan responsibilities. I would also hope that the Synod would trumpet the fact that we are already one church. This is implicit in the teaching of Vatican II that the members of the other denominations are entitled to the name of Christian. We all say the same creed. Our official differences are relatively trivial. Even the Catholic Church, for all its emphasis on authority and uniformity, now recognizes the primacy of conscience. Conscience means following one's honest discernment, even if in error. The Synod could look at what kind of unity we are seeking. What kind of unity did Christ pray for? A unity of love and purpose, not necessarily a unity in the command structure. Certainly not a unity dependent on a 700-page catechism or 500 pages of canon law. The Synod might consider something that would be called a declaration of the existing unity of the one Church of Christ. We are all one in Jesus Christ. As followers of Jesus, we love and care for one another. This unity is only found at the organizational level on issues of who is in charge and in doctrinal matters of secondary priority in the hierarchy of truths. The Church has so many problems and so many issues that the forthcoming Root and Branch Synod will have to focus very firmly on the basic foundational diseases, of which the detailed issues are just the symptoms. In this respect, I think the title of the movement, Root and Branch, is providential. It suggests a really thorough investigation. It also suggests that if the Synod focuses on tending the roots, the improvement in the branches, and indeed the fruits, will follow in God's good time. Thank you very much.
Wow. Lucky I'm bowled over. That's the most concise history of the Church I have heard in a long, long time, all the way from Jesus right up to date. And you put it all in line. I think it's a tremendous achievement. The way you present it today, it's very concise, it's very clear. We see where the problems have arisen, and you focus back on Christ as to where we need to go now. I'm really impressed by that. For those of you looking to read the book, I would warn you, there are 488 footnotes in the book. It's a tremendous production by Lockheed. So my advice to you when reading the book is to start at the back. Not to find out who done it, but how to read the book and get the most out of it for yourself. As Lockie said, there are 29 proposals for reforms in our church, and they're all summarized in a few pages at the back of his book. But Lockie has very kindly then, for each of those 29 proposals, he has them linked to the pages in his book, giving the relevant history, where they originated, what needs to be done about it. So you can focus in on a specific area, whether it's women in the church, whether it's East-West split, whether it's the schisms, whether it's Vatican I. And you can focus in on that and read that. Because his book it contains a huge amount of information. And unless you're a theologian, it could be quite daunting to try and read it from page 1 to page 300 straight through. So I think taking that focus point and looking at the 29 proposals that Lockie has presented there makes sense for the reader of the book, but it also makes great sense for Root and Branch as we plan the synod for September coming up now. There are great ideas there from Lockie, and that you can't expect to implement all 29 proposals that Lockie has set out there in one synod. So we need to focus, and this book will help us to focus on those. So I'd just like to finish by saying, do go out there and buy Lockie's book. I think it's a tremendous piece of work. It's a tremendous reference source, and it's a great guide forward for Root and Branch. And Lockie, you've gone way, way up in my estimation yet again. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Colm. And while we're at it, let's let people know that if you type in "the Curia is the Pope" in Google on your computer, you will end up able to click on "Buy Now." And it's available from Mount Salas Press in County Wicklow. And it's also available from Amazon.